Hey everybody, welcome back to GitHub for Windows users. I'm Jeremy, this is Brianna from Microsoft and from GitHub, and we're glad to be your trainers for this. And you are watching Module 3. We've already covered some basic concepts of Git and GitHub, and we've also talked about using GitHub and following the recommended GitHub flow in the browser. But now we're kind of going down to client side, so you might want a more integrated and a more native experience for interacting with your repositories in GitHub, and that's exactly why GitHub made GitHub Desktop. So let's have a look at the agenda here. We have already looked at, like I said, the basic concepts in the browser, and now we're going to talk about GitHub Desktop. I am actually going to talk about a couple of other clients just because some other ones exist. But GitHub Desktop is kind of the sanctioned one, being from GitHub and being a very good and clean interface itself. And then we'll get into more Windows-specific stuff like the integrations with Visual Studio before discussing the command line and some other stuff. So let's go ahead and look at GitHub on the desktop, GitHub Desktop. So we're going to introduce the program to you, and then we're going to talk about using it for managing your repositories, and then using it for following the flow, handling branches and changes, and then I'll point out some of those other desktop tools. So first off, GitHub Desktop, this is a cross-platform application, meaning that it's available both on Windows and on Mac, and you can use it for a number of the same functions that Brianna already showed you in the browser. There's some extra stuff that it does, a little bit of extra stuff, and there's some things that it doesn't do. And so we're going to look at, like I said, managing your repos, creating, branching, merging, committing. And it does pull requests kind of in a simplistic way, but what it doesn't do is it doesn't allow you to do the conversations around a pull request. It also doesn't allow you to do issues. So there's no conversations that happen. The conversations are kind of relegated to online, which is maybe good. Maybe that's where they belong. One thing that it does allow you to do that you can't do online is staging by line. I'll show you more explicitly what that means. I think it's really fun. I think it's really great. It may actually be a symptom of a bad habit, so it wouldn't be necessary if you were doing a good job of following the flow, but I'll describe that more in a second. And also it gives you a really, really good visual of your repository. I think that's one of the main reasons why people like to download native clients for Git and GitHub is the visuals that you get on your repository, being able to see the commits and the branches and the relationships between those. Especially for us Windows users, it's we've got a history with not only the GUI but with central source control, and we didn't have necessarily the same kinds of visuals. And then when Git introduced the complexity of commits and hashes and snapshots and stuff, it was a difficult transition. It was difficult to visualize it, so we became really reliant on these visual tools. So that's what we're going to cover. This is it. This is what GitHub Desktop looks like. Like I said, it's a real great UI, a real modern-looking application, and it gives you a lot of information on one screen like a typical native application. Over on the left, you see that we've got a list of all of the repositories that I've pulled into GitHub Desktop. This is not a live view of what's online, it's actually just the ones that I've determined I want in my tool. So maybe you have a billion repos online, locally you just kind of want to manage a few of them, that's what it's going to show you there. But you can see that I have this one repo called Water Rower highlighted, and then it gives me a list of all of the commits. Mostly this has been my project, so it's all me in the commit history there. So I get a list of all of these commits, and that's really helpful to be able to see that and the relative size of these commits. And over on the right, whichever commit I have highlighted, it's going to show me what the majority of changes are to that one. So I actually get a view of the diffs. But then along the top, this gray bar up here, I can see the history and all of the commits that have been added to this. Once again, this is not necessarily a collaborative project that I chose as an example. It was mostly just me, but you can see all of my commit history there in that timeline. So that's basically what you get for the program. If you need to install this, you just go to desktop.github.com. It's going to detect whether you are a Mac or a Windows user and give you the right blue button there, and give you a little bit of an introduction to the program. And then, of course, you just push the button, download it, and install it like you have probably 1,000 other apps on your desktop. Now, when you install this on Windows, It's really interesting. It doesn't just give you this one program. It's really smart about what it gives you. And for that reason, I tell a lot of Windows users, if you want to install Git on your computer, although you can go install Git for Windows, or there are a few other ways to install Git, I always just tell them, just go install GitHub Desktop, even if you're not going to use desktop, because it gives you Git, and it gives it to you in a little, it puts it in your app data directory, in a directory, kind of an isolated installation of it. And that's really nice because it travels along with GitHub Desktop, and you know that you're going to have the right version of Git traveling along with you. So if you look in your Start menu after you've installed it, you'll see not only the GitHub icon, that's a little octocat, but you also get the Git shell. And the Git shell is actually PowerShell. So in Windows, we have PowerShell, which is a really great command line tool and very, very capable. And the Git shell, I'm just going to go ahead and open that for you here. I'm going to open it on my machine. I've got the GitHub and I've got Git shell. And when I open that, it's going to run a PS1 script that's going to light up a couple of utilities for Git. One of them is called PoshGit, and it makes it extremely easy to look at your repos, to get a good view of your repos. So let me go ahead and jump into that water rower repo, and you see that PoshGit has recognized that I'm working on I'm going to try to blow this up just a little bit here. It recognizes that I'm working on a GitHub repository, and so it's given me a little bit of meta information. It sees that I'm on the master branch, and it sees that I'm current with the master branch, but I have one changed file. So I have no additional files, no deleted files, but I have one modified file. And I'm not waiting on any commits from anybody else in master. So that's really helpful information to just know at a glance without having to do a git status or something.
Absolutely. I want to jump in here. So you mentioned downloading GitHub Desktop is a good way to make sure you have all of the other tooling involved, and we suggest that a lot. So when you do move to the command line, even if you don't want to right at first, you know that it's going to be set up well.
Yeah.
If you look online for a tutorial or some advice on how to fix a problem, you don't know what system the other people are using, and having that syntax match makes your life a whole lot easier.
Yeah, for sure. Let me show you what it's actually doing here. I'll go back to that Git shell icon. This is a little trick I learned. I can open that file location on my machine, and I can see the Git shell icon. I can right click and open that one, and it takes me into this app data directory that I was telling you about. And in here you see that we have this portable version of Git, and that's a little bit small, so I'm going to blow that up for you. We have this portable version of Git, and we have this directory called PoshGit. Now, one little pro tip for you Windows users, if you have the anniversary edition of Windows 10, you may not know this yet, but you have Linux on your machine. You have Bash on Ubuntu on Windows, and that's really, really exciting. But before you get that far, before you get real Linux working on your machine, you may sometimes want just some of the Linux commands. And you can do that with something like Cygwin. But what I tell people is that you can go into this, wherever you have Git installed, and you go into the USR, and you go into the bin, and look at this. You see all those Linux commands? Those are all available to you on Windows. All you have to do is take this path, this directory location, and add that to your path in Windows, and now all of a sudden in your terminal you can SSH, you can SCP, you can touch, you can all these different things you can do on a Linux box, you can do those on Windows as well. So little pro tip there, if you've got GitHub Desktop installed, then you not only have Git shell and portable Git, but you also have PoshGit, and you also have all of those Linux commands that kind of came along with Git. Okay, so that's what you get with it. Now, when you first get into GitHub Desktop, we're going to open it here in a second, but when you first get into it, I beg you, go into the options and have a glance at these, because you want to make sure that you are configured, that you're logged into GitHub, and that you have your Git name and email address in there correctly, because those are going to be signing all of your commits, and so it's important that they are accurate. Probably the light and dark appearance is not critical. It's just up to preference. But the other thing that's critical in here is the clone path. This path over here, this C/code, is where I keep my code. Now, by default, it's going to put it under C, users, Jeremy, whatever, some big long path. And that's not a good idea because sometimes in Windows you can get in trouble with really long path names. It's actually supported at its core, but there are certain utilities that croak whenever you have too long of a path name, and so it's a good idea to keep your code paths short by starting with a short path. So that's why I start with C code, and that's where all my repos live. So that's the options, but let's go ahead and close that off for now, and we're going to look at more aspects of GitHub Desktop in a second. We're going to look at managing the repos and then do a demo on that and a whole bunch more, but that's it for now.